The 1970s were drawing to a close, and like many decades, it had been a mixed bag. Although this time the bag probably had C-3PO on it. But 1979 wasn't about to go gently into that good night. The year saw the release of several classic movies, the last ride of a Hollywood legend, and the debut of three bona fide icons of modern professional sports. It also saw heightened political tensions, capping off the globally tumultuous 70s with a significant Soviet coup that would start toppling the dominoes, ultimately leading to a shocking September morning in New York City. And above it all loomed the specter of the impending 1980s, which began to take the shape of a folksy presidential candidate who liked to wear cowboy hats. We're going to talk about the news, culture, sports, and entertainment, and all that was weird in the 70s. This is Timeline. Time to grab your Moonraker laser and jump the General Lee over 3 Mile Island, because this episode is all about 1979. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know in the comments below your favorite 70s moment. Now get ready to find your rainbow connection, because this is 1979. Kicking off the year, Hilton Hotels founder Connie, if you watched Mad Men, Hilton checked out of this earthly plane on January 3rd. The man responsible for the first international hotel chain, and for Paris Hilton's music career, passed away, checking out late at age 91. Oof, he stuck around for a while, like a Hilton timeshare payment. 13 days later, the landmark nature series Life on Earth premiered on BBC One, January 16th. The ambitious 13-episode documentary took 3 years to complete, using hundreds of hours of the highest quality footage available to chronicle the history of life on the planet. Life on Earth was such a success that it turned presenter David Attenborough into a household name and spawned decades of follow-up series under the Life banner. The first shot in the war of man versus machines was fired 9 days later, when the first documented case of a robot taking out a human in the United States occurred. 25-year-old factory worker Robert Williams was struck in the head by a robotic arm in a Ford Motor plant in Michigan. The accident was attributed to a lack of adequate safety measures, and Williams' family was awarded $10 million in damages. Meanwhile, the robot went right back to work as if nothing happened. Must have been a robo-senator's kid.
That's Bo and Luke Duke. And from the way they're duded up, they got something cooking. And you know it ain't girls, because it's still daylight.
Famed American businessman and former Vice President Nelson Rockefeller passed away on the 26th at age 70. Rumors began swirling after it was revealed that Rockefeller had collapsed in the presence of a 25-year-old aide named Megan Marshak, who had previously worked for him in Washington, D.C., and for whom he had recently purchased a Manhattan condo. Rockefeller? Oh, he barely knew her. Allegedly. Moving into February, Sex Pistols bassist Sid Vicious departed for the Great Dive Bar in the Sky on the 2nd. Vicious had recently been arrested for the murder of his girlfriend, Nancy Spungen, and had just been released from prison the day before. The punk rocker bought a bunch of H to celebrate and OD'd that night. The story of his brief life would eventually be adapted into a movie. The 1986 film Sid and Nancy, starring Gary Oldman and Chloe Webb as the doomed couple. Back to 79 and turning into music, the Village People had their biggest hit when their song YMCA peaked at number 2 on the Billboard music charts on February 3rd. The now iconic song was the only single off their album Cruisin', released in September of the previous year. It would be a good year for the Village People. They would have another song climb the charts a few months later, when In the Navy reached number 3 on May 19th. The sun set on nefarious Nazi scientist Josef Mengele on the 7th. Mengele's unscrupulous human experiments conducted during World War II earned him the nickname the Angel of Death. When a guy has a more intense nickname than Hitler, you know he's bad news. Mengele fled Germany in 1949 and spent the rest of his life hiding in South America, where he suffered a stroke while swimming and drowned in Brazil at age 67. Hungarian engineer and physicist Denis Gabor passed away on the 9th at age 78. Gabor was a prolific scientist, but he is best known for inventing holography, for which he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1971. So now you know who to thank for all your coolest trading cards.
We'll be right back.
The Hot Wheels line for $79. And this Hot Wheels van is hot looking inside, too. There's a picture like this inside the Incredible Hulk Scene Machines van. You can buy it in specially marked packages with these 3 Hot Wheels.
Let me see the Hulk.
Hot Wheels from Mattel.
Warriors, come out to play. Warriors, come out to play.
Moving into March in the world of sports, the highest-rated game in the history of televised college basketball went down on the 26th. The 41st NCAA Men's Basketball Championship had the Michigan State Spartans facing off against the Indiana State Sycamores. More specifically, it pitted up-and-coming stars Magic Johnson and Larry Bird against each other, beginning a rivalry that would last throughout their careers in the NBA. Johnson and Bird would both debut in the league later that year, when Bird played his first game with the Boston Celtics, and Magic played his first game with the Los Angeles Lakers on October 12th. The next day, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that police officers cannot randomly stop cars without any cause. The 8-1 decision determined that cops randomly selecting motorists to detain in order to inspect their driver's license and registration was unconstitutional. One day later, the nuclear power facility at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania experienced a partial meltdown. Mechanical failures, design flaws, and operator errors all contributed to the accident, which remains the most significant nuclear incident in American history. Although no one was injured and the meltdown was contained before any serious long-lasting harm took effect, the incident was the beginning of the end of nuclear power plant construction in the States. Cleanup of the reactor would ultimately last 14 years and cost $1 billion. Pakistani President Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was executed at the beginning of the month, being hung in secrecy for the crime of conspiring to assassinate a political rival on the 4th. Bhutto had been deposed in a coup by General Muhammad Zia-ul-Haq 18 months earlier. Although he was a controversial figure who had served as both president and prime minister of Pakistan during a period of extreme unrest, the charges against him are generally agreed to have been bogus. Zia continued to serve as Pakistan's de facto president until he perished in a plane crash in 1988. President Jimmy Carter had an infamous run-in with a rabbit on April 20th. The rabbit in question was being pursued by dogs and swam out into the lake where Carter was fishing and tried to jump into his boat. The president shooed the wild beast away with his oar, creating a memorable image that became a popular news story that hurt his re-election campaign. The state of Georgia selected Ray Charles' version of the classic Georgia on My Mind to be the official state song on the 24th. Originally co-written and recorded by Hoagy Carmichael in 1930, Charles, a native son of Georgia, recorded a version of the song for his 1960 album, The Genius Hits the Road. It became a #1 Billboard hit, as well as the signature tune of Charles's career. Margaret Thatcher became the UK's first female prime minister when she was elected on the 4th of May. The leader of Great Britain's Conservative Party, Thatcher was a controversial figure, earning the nickname the Iron Lady due to her staunch politics. She wound up serving 3 terms, leaving office in 1990, making her the longest-serving British Prime Minister of the 20th century. Elton John became the first Western pop star to tour the Soviet Union when he kicked off 7 days' worth of shows on the 20th of May. The Rocket Man played 8 shows in Leningrad and Moscow. His final show of the tour was broadcast live via satellite across Europe by the BBC, and footage from the tour was used in a television documentary titled To Russia with Elton. Sticking with music, the Charlie Daniels Band released their signature hit, The Devil Went Down to Georgia, on the 21st. A blazing 3.5-minute southern rock tune about a skilled fiddle player making a deal with the devil, the song was certified platinum and has remained a pop culture mainstay ever since, and makes us all kind of want to fiddle. We go now to San Francisco, where on the 21st of May, the White Night riots erupted. The riots were the result of the conviction of former city supervisor Dan White, who you may remember was responsible for the 1978 assassination of San Francisco Mayor George Moscone and city supervisor and first open gay politician Harvey Milk. Protesters were outraged by White's conviction of the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. The riots started as a peaceful march that escalated while outside of City Hall, and later at a bar called the Elephant Walk.
We'll be right back.
Wow, macaroni! macaroni and cheese. Mine's spaghetti.
Beef noodles? My wife's a magician.
The trick is new Mug-a-Lunch from Betty Crocker. 3 tasty hot dishes you make in a mug, 1 helping at a time. Just add boiling water, wait 4 minutes, stir, and eat.
Mug-a-Lunch, new from Betty Crocker.
Funk band Chic released their chart-topping single, Good Times, on the 4th. The song hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and has gone on to become one of the most influential pieces of modern music, having been sampled more than almost any other song in music history, most notably by the Sugar Hill Gang in their 1979 hit, Rapper's Delight. John Wayne saddled up and hit the old dusty trail for the last time on June 11th. One of the most iconic movie stars in history, Wayne built a legendary career playing hard-edged Western heroes, like the grizzled Marshal Rooster Cogburn in 1969's True Grit. The Duke was 72. Rock legend Chuck Berry pleaded guilty to tax evasion on June 12th. The father of rock and roll admitted to having dodged payment of over $100,000 in income tax back in 1973 and was sentenced to 4 months in prison. Berry had just performed at the White House at President Carter's request 11 days earlier. Go, Johnny, go. Go and pay your taxes. In a landmark decision, the Sioux Nation received $100 million in compensation for Black Hills, South Dakota on June the 13th. The land was taken from the Sioux by the American government back in 1877 and is currently the site of Mount Rushmore National Memorial. Today, the settlement has grown to over $1 billion, but the Sioux Nation has never claimed it.
I'm Stetler.
I'm Waldorf. We're here to heckle a Muppet movie.
Gentlemen, that's straight ahead. Private screening, room D.
Private screening?
Yeah, they're afraid to show it in public.
Oh!
You appear with the tedious inevitability of an unloved season.
I didn't think there were any seasons in space.
As far as you're concerned, only winter.
The greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali, announced his 3rd retirement on June 27th. Ali insisted this time he was done with professional fighting for good, despite his earlier retirements that had turned out to be less than permanent. The 37-year-old heavyweight champ abdicated his world title in a letter to the World Boxing Association, but this time would turn out to be less than permanent as well. He would come out of retirement one more time to challenge Larry Holmes for the title on October 2nd, 1980. Dubbed the last hurrah, a visibly past his prime Ali lost in a 10th round TKO after his corner threw in the towel. The beginning of July saw the debut of Sony's Walkman. The brainchild of a Sony executive who just wanted a more portable way to listen to music while on the go, the Walkman started off slowly, but by the end of the summer was turning into a genuine phenomenon. The Walkman would go on to become one of the most successful products in the company's history and one of the most influential consumer electronics ever produced. The infamous Disco Demolition Night went down on the 12th of July. Baseball fans were lured to the Chicago White Sox's Comiskey Park with the promise of 98-cent ticket prices if they brought along a disco record to be destroyed on the field in between the 2 games. The event was spearheaded by local shock jock and avid disco hater Steve Dahl. When Dahl took the field to dramatically detonate the disco records, all hell broke loose, resulting in a riot that saw thousands of fans storm the field and trash the place. Needless to say, the promotion was not repeated.
Nothing else in the world smells like that. I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Now you listen here. He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. Now go away. Who are you? I'm his mother, that's who.
Jonathan.
Max, what are you doing in that outfit?
Sorry, I didn't want to scare you.
Vocal tennis stars John McEnroe and Ilie Nastase faced off in an infamous U.S. Open match on August 30th. The match erupted into a memorable display of decidedly unsportsmanlike conduct, which wasn't much of a surprise considering the 2 competitors were nicknamed Super Brat and Nasty, respectively. At one point, Nastase, who was losing badly, refused to resume the match, stirring the crowd up into a near riot. The chaos continued to escalate until Nastase finally had the chair referee replaced, and the score reset to what it had been before he'd received a penalty for delaying the match. Nastasi still lost.
Entertainment with the newest network. ESPN. Everything was seen.
British band The Police released their first #1 single, Message in a Bottle, on the 29th. The track became one of the band's signature hits, climbing to the top of the Billboard charts in the UK. Message in a Bottle remains one of The Police's best-known songs, and, according to interviews conducted over the years since its release, one of the band's personal favorites. The newly elected Pope John Paul II became the first pope to visit Ireland on the 29th. Like, ever. It was kind of a big deal. An estimated 2.7 million people greeted the Pope over the course of his 3-day visit, making it a major public event and one of the most significant in the history of modern Catholicism. Among other things, the Pope addressed the rising political violence in Northern Ireland as the Troubles raged on, urging his followers to reject brutality and remember the teachings of the Church.
Introducing Bo Derek.
Did you ever do a Torvalds Bolero?
In Blake Edwards, 10.
On October 11th, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was awarded to Alan Cormack and Godfrey Hounsfield for their work in developing computer-assisted tomography, better known as the CAT scan. Yeah, they definitely deserve to win that one. The X-ray imaging technique is easily one of the most significant technological achievements in the history of modern medicine. Wayne Gretzky scored his first goal in the National Hockey League on October 14th. The Great One had previously played for Canada's World Hockey Association. During his inaugural NHL season, he went on to tie for the most goals scored by a single player and would win the Hart Memorial Trophy as the league's most valuable player, an award he would claim 7 more times during his career. Not to be outdone by those CAT scan guys, Mother Teresa was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize on October 17th. The famous Catholic nun and founder of the Missionaries of Charity dedicated her life to charity and hospice care, specifically for patients afflicted with tuberculosis, leprosy, and HIV and AIDS. Although some consider her a controversial figure, Mother Teresa would eventually be canonized by the Catholic Church, making her official title Saint Teresa of Calcutta. President Carter signed legislation creating the Department of Education on the 17th of October. The creation of the department had been one of Carter's campaign promises, establishing an entity to determine federal funding policies for American public schools, as well as research educational issues and collect information and statistics about American schooling. South Korean President Park Chung-hee was taken out on the 26th. The former general had served as the president of the Republic of Korea for nearly 20 years, after taking office in 1963 following a military coup. Lots of those going around. But his regime was oppressive and authoritarian, and his ticket was finally punched by his friend, Kim Jae-gyu, the head of the Korean Central Intelligence Agency, who shot Park and several of Park's bodyguards during a banquet dinner. Birmingham, Alabama elected its first black mayor on October 30th. Richard Arrington Jr., a former city council member and university professor with a doctorate in zoology, took office after a runoff election. He wound up being elected to a total of 5 terms, serving as the city's mayor for the next 20 years. The owners of the iconic disco nightclub Studio 54 pleaded guilty to income tax evasion on November the 2nd. Studio 54's reputation for debauchery, rampant drug use, and celebrity clientele made it a symbol for 1970s excess. But the party was over when its owners, Stephen Rubel and Ian Schrager, were convicted. Mirrors and rolled-up dollar bills would never be the same.
We'll be right back.
It's okay, you can have it.
No.
Really, you can have it.
Okay.
A Coke and a smile makes me feel good. Makes me feel nice.
Be around.
That's the way it should be. I like to see
Hey, kid.
the whole world smiling with me. Coca-Cola as life. Have a Coke and
Thanks, Mean Joe.
smile.
We go to Tehran, where Iranian student demonstrators seized control of the U.S. Embassy on the 4th of November. Revolutionary group members were followers of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a devout anti-American cleric. The group held more than 60 Americans hostage for the next 444 days and didn't release them until just after Ronald Reagan's 1981 inaugural address, in what was interpreted as a big old FU to Jimmy Carter, who had allowed the deposed former Shah of Iran to come to America for cancer treatment. Ayatollah Khomeini, who famously dubbed the U.S. the Great Satan, would spend much of the next decade as the supreme leader of Iran.
Who could it be? Who could it be? I just can't imagine who. Could it be Satan?
North American Air Defense Command, or NORAD if you're nasty, issued a false alarm on the 9th of November that nearly triggered nuclear war. NORAD's missile warning system, designed to alert the American government if any ICBMs were launched by enemy nations, falsely reported to the Pentagon, Strategic Air Command, and others that 1,400 Soviet missiles were on their way to the United States. The mix-up occurred when a technician ran a test program but forgot to update the system to reflect this. That is a pretty big error. 3 days later, President Carter announced a halt to the importation of that oh-so-gooey and delicious petroleum from Iran, citing a potential threat to national security. The move was a response to the ongoing hostage crisis at the American Embassy in Tehran, and it effectively ended the cooperative relationship between the two nations. Smelling blood in the water, Ronald Reagan announced his candidacy for president the next day. Reagan, a former actor who had previously served 2 terms as the governor of California, had unsuccessfully run for president back in 1976, ultimately losing the Republican nomination to the then-sitting president, Gerald Ford. Reagan's chances were looking much stronger now, particularly as the ongoing Iranian hostage crisis continued to erode President Carter's credibility as an effective leader. American Airlines Flight 444 was forced to make an emergency landing on November 15th, when a package sent by the Unabomber exploded in the plane's cargo hold mid-flight. Although no one was fatally injured, 12 passengers had to be treated for smoke inhalation. It was the 3rd attack made by the infamous terrorist, who would eventually be identified as Fyodor Kaczynski, a former mathematics professor turned anarchist. Kaczynski had detonated 2 previous packages at Northwestern University, earning him the FBI case identifier Unabomb, University and Airline Bomber. Oh, so that's where it comes from. The first artificial blood transfusion in the United States was administered at the University of Minnesota Hospital on the 20th. The patient, a 67-year-old Jehovah's Witness, had refused a traditional transfusion because it was against his religion. The man received a total of 6 pints of a blood substitute called Fluosol, which has the ability to carry and dissolve oxygen just like normal blood. On November 24th, a damning report by a government watchdog agency revealed that U.S. troops serving in the Vietnam War were indeed exposed to Agent Orange, contrary to what the Defense Department had previously claimed. The General Accounting Office, now known as the Government Accountability Office, found that thousands of Marines had been exposed to the deadly herbicide, either by entering affected combat zones or being within 1 mile of combat zones that were doused with the chemical. Agent Orange had been deployed as a defoliant to clear forests and crops, but the toxic chemicals were found to cause dramatic health problems in humans, including multiple types of cancer and serious birth defects. Arguably, the most iconic NFL broadcasting duo ever took the mic for the first time on November 25th, when John Madden and Pat Summerall called the Minnesota Vikings-Tampa Bay Buccaneers game on CBS. Summerall played straight man to the larger-than-life Madden. The partnership lasted an astonishing 22 years, during which time NFL fans were introduced to the Turducken, a true artist of the telestrator, and of course, Madden Football, EA Sports. It's in the game. Heading into the final month of the final year of the 1970s, and much like the 70s, what began as fun ended with tragedy, as 11 people were fatally trampled at a concert by The Who. Outside the Riverfront Coliseum in Cincinnati, Ohio, eager fans crushed through the entrance shortly after the gates opened. The frenzied pace was caused by the seating, which was mostly first come, first served. The band was not informed of the tragedy until after the performance, because it was feared that the unruly crowd would riot if the concert was canceled.
We are aboard a huge starship called the Enterprise.
This is the return of Captain Kirk.
An alien object of unbelievable destructive power is less than 3 days away from this planet.
He hates these cans! Stay away from the cans!
Okay, here's your question. Which trivia board game was invented by 2 Canadian journalists on December 15th? Give up? It was Chris Haney and Scott Abbott, who invented Trivial Pursuit that night while trying to devise a Scrabble variant and sharing a few beers. Today, it is among the most popular board games, having sold over 100 million copies and releasing several themed spin-offs, including a Harry Potter edition. You're a quizzer, Harry.
That I'm capable of taking care of him.
What do you mean?
I want my son.
You can't have him.
2 weeks later, Afghanistan's president, Hafizullah Amin, was taken out in a Soviet coup that went down on December 27th. Amin had overthrown the previous president, Mir Mohammad Taraki, just 4 months earlier. Amin's strict nationalist views, along with his pursuit of favorable relationships with both the United States and Pakistan, did not sit well with the Soviet Union. So Russian forces invaded just before the end of the decade to rub Amin out and install a pro-Russia president in his place, Barbara Karmal. The coup kicked off the Soviet-Afghan War, in which several insurgent groups collectively known as the Mujahideen fought against Soviet occupation. One significant figure in the Mujahideen was Osama bin Laden. And so, the 1970s, the decade of boogieing down, jumping buses, rationing gas, exiting the Vietnam War, resigning the presidency, and so very much more, came to a close. Undeniably, one of the most influential periods of modern history, the 1970s shaped America and the rest of the world in ways that we're still feeling the effects of to this day. The 1980s were now blazing into view, with Reaganomics, pastel detectives, and the end of the Cold War ready to ride into the danger zone in a time-traveling DeLorean. But that's next time. So what do you think? What was the most significant event of the 1970s? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other groovy timeline videos.